equals it's Kim, and lately, besides the fact that I realized I do this after every time I say it's Kim. Okay. I have been talking lately on my channel, which is generally about lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender issues. Lately I've been talking around some thoughts on, well, first it was LGBT stuff for straight people, and how straight people are kind of part of all of that. And then we got to talking about some of the difficulties that through all of my experience presenting to various groups of straight folks that kind of impede straight folks' ability to engage around LGBT topics and with LGBT people. So today we're going to continue that theme. And last week I did a whole bunch of presentations and ran into a situation in my own personal life, and the situation in my personal life and some of the issues that I heard straight people expressing collided. So I thought I'd talk about it today. The issue is reading judgment into statements of fact. And I found that I was doing it. An example of this, a really easy example of this, is if somebody said to you, "You're late." It's actually just a statement of fact. Me, personally, if somebody were to say to you, "You're late," I'd have heard that in my head, that little voice in my head, as judgment, that it was wrong that I was late. Maybe they meant that, maybe they didn't. I would have been making assumptions, and shouldn't do that. So anyway, the idea of statements of fact being read as statements of judgment. Okay, how does this relate to straight folks trying to process who and what and LGBT people are and how to talk to them? Well, we've talked about recently that making mistakes is going to happen. Maybe it's around pronouns. Maybe it's around using the correct name for a transgender person, especially one you've known for a very, very long time. It might be around words like preference or lifestyle or special rights or any of these kinds of words where you meant well because they're words that you've heard used in the past, and so they come to mind. They weren't heard by the audience the way you intended them, and that happens a lot. And what might have happened is somebody would say to you, "My being gay is not a choice." And we can hear that as a statement of fact, no judgment, it's just a statement of fact, or we can hear it as a statement of judgment. It's a mistake to hear that as a statement of judgment. You're making assumptions about the person who said it, and we shouldn't make assumptions like that. So what do? Well, you could say, "Oh, you're right. I used the word choice, and that I could have used a different choice, or I could have used, yes, you heard me use the word choice, and I feel I could have used a better word." And then you can correct yourself or not. I mean, it's totally up to you. But that original statement that somebody said, "My being gay is not a choice," is not a judgment on you. It's their statement of fact. Same thing as "my pronouns are she, her, hers." Not a judgment on you. It's a statement of fact. And that's all. And so then, so if, say, you used the wrong pronouns for somebody, that you're talking to a trans woman and used he, which would have been the wrong pronoun. She would have likely have been the right pronoun. So you accidentally use he, and the person says, "My pronouns are she, her, and hers." It's just statement of fact. It's not a judgment. At that point, you can make a choice on how you respond. You could correct yourself. You could just move on. That's your choice. But the statement itself, "My pronouns are she, her, hers," is not a judgment. It's a statement of fact. Anyway, I ran into this in my own personal life, and I realized that I do it all the time. I hear statements of fact as judgments that I should or shouldn't have done something, when that's not the case. So I propose that straight folks, when you use a word that somebody else doesn't like, the most common ones are misgendering or dead naming. So misgendering is that is using the wrong pronoun. Dead naming is using the former name, legal name for somebody who is transgender, or using the wrong term like sexual preference, or some of these other words that are older, and somebody corrects you or says, sexual it's not a preference, it's an orientation, I was born that way. That's a statement of fact. It's not a judgment. If they said, you're a horrible person for using the word preference, yeah, that now has judgment on it. But if they're just saying, it's not a preference, I was born that way, that's just statement of fact. Okay. It's not easy. It takes some work on our part to understand statement of fact versus statements that have judgment attached. It takes some work on our part around what's statement of fact as opposed to what's judgment. I'm working on it. You can work on it. So for me, two of the ways that this came up is this week I was talking about, I learned a long time ago that in the mental health community, you don't say that somebody committed suicide, you say that they completed, because committed makes it sound criminal. So it's completed suicide, and I messed that up. And somebody can correct me. Oh, you should have, would say, we don't use committed, we use completed. That's statement of fact. It's not a judgment. And I would respond, yep, you're right, I knew that, and I blew it. Completed suicide. Or I was presenting to some folks around developmental disabilities, and I know about people first language from the HIV work I do. So we say a person living with HIV, a person thriving with HIV. We don't say, an HIV positive person or something like that. We lead with person first. And the same kind of thing is true in the developmental disabilities community, where you are a person living with a disability as opposed to a disabled person. And I blew it. But the group and I had actually had this conversation about learning, and as long as you're trying, it's okay. And so the group corrected me when I messed it up, and I acknowledged that I'd messed it up, and I corrected myself, and we went on, and everybody was very patient with each other around making errors, learning to use the language correctly. It takes time, it takes effort. Anyway, folks, if you enjoy this kind of content, please give me a thumbs up, hit the red bell or hit the bell and make it red so that you get notified every time I put up a new video. And I hope you have a great week or weekend. Not sure when this will go up. Bye, equals.